Doctors, have you ever had to choose between the lives of multiple patients? I'd been a resident for 3 months when they assigned me to assist Dr. Dynamo in the basement radiology wing. He always weirded me out. Just yesterday I'd seen him watching videos of building demolitions. We were reviewing MRI scans in the darkened room when he locked the door and turned to me, pressing a piece of paper against my hand. His doctor's handwriting was perfectly clear. Everyone on this floor dies at 10:30. The timer is set. The clock read 10:18. I thought he was having some kind of breakdown until he pulled up his scrub top. Strapped to his torso was a vest of gray blocks connected by colored wires and a cell phone screen glowing green, enough C4 to bring down the entire building from the foundation up. My vision went black at the edges. The room spun. We were directly under the main hospital tower, 8 floors of patients above us. The pediatric cancer ward where that little girl just got her bone marrow transplant. The maternity wing, full of parents experiencing the joy of life. Hundreds of people, maybe 1,000, who'd be crushed instantly when the support pillars gave way. My throat closed up. I couldn't run, he'd locked the door. I couldn't fight him. One wrong move and he'd detonate. His thumb was already hovering over the button. The basement walls were too thick for screaming. "Why?" I croaked out, my mind racing through impossible options on how to save my life. "This foundation is rotten," he said quietly. "Sometimes you have to tear everything down to rebuild." His finger moved closer to the button. 11 minutes. 13 minutes now. My scrubs were drenched in sweat. The room felt like a tomb. Those MRI images still glowing on the screens showing someone's brain tumor. Someone who was upstairs right now hoping for good news. I thought about the text I'd sent my girlfriend this morning. "Long shift. See you tonight." There wouldn't be a tonight. "I need to go say goodbye to my mom," I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. "Please, she's the only family I have left. She's in the cancer ward. I want to spend my last few minutes with her." He studied me for a long moment. The computer clock ticked to 10:21. 9 minutes. His hand went to the door, his keycard swiping. "Go straight for the ward. I have cameras here. I see you make one wrong move and I'll detonate right now." The door clicked open and he grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "I see you talk to one single person other than her. Even as much as your mouth moving, you know what happens." He let me out. The basement hallway stretched before me, harsh fluorescent lights making everything look green and sick. That chemical smell from the pathology lab burned my nose. The distant hum of the MRI machine running someone's scan, some patient lying in that tube right now not knowing they had 12 minutes left. My legs felt disconnected from my body, each step deliberate, measured, normal walking pace when every cell screamed at me to sprint. It's true my mom was up in the cancer ward. She was 20 feet ahead on the left, but at the end of that hall, 40 feet away, was the morgue loading dock. Security took their smoke breaks out there. The cancer ward would be my last chance to see Mom, but the loading dock, if I went there instead, maybe I could somehow save everyone? 15 feet to the cancer ward. My peripheral vision caught the evacuation route sign pointing toward the loading dock. 10 feet. There was a janitor's cart parked against the wall, bottles of bleach and cleaning supplies. 8 feet to the bathroom door. I thought about Kaylee upstairs, a 7-year-old cancer patient in the bed next to my mom. They'd become friends. Kaylee's parents practically lived in her room, reading them both stories, promising her she'd get better. They'd decorated the entire room with princess stickers, something my mom loved. 6 feet now. My shoes squeaked on the polished floor. 5 feet. The bathroom door handle was brass, worn from thousands of hands. 4 feet. My body pulling toward it, toward the illusion of safety, toward 3 more minutes to think. 3 feet. The morgue loading dock seemed impossibly far. 2 feet. My eyes caught the camera by the cancer ward entrance. He was watching me, waiting. I looked through the window quickly and saw my mom. She was smiling, actually hopeful she would live. Every instinct screamed at me to go in, buy time, think of some way to communicate with her. But what would I do from there? I walked past the cancer ward and broke into a run, my back tensed, waiting for the explosion, wondering if I'd feel the heat first or just cease to exist in a flash of nothing. My shoes slapped against the floor as I ran, the sound bouncing off concrete walls. The hallway stretched forever, 40 feet feeling like a mile with each second burning away. My chest hurt from holding my breath and my hands were shaking, so bad I could barely feel them. The loading dock door was gray metal with a push bar, and I hit it full speed without slowing down. Cold air smacked my face as I burst outside into the service alley behind the hospital. A security guard stood against the brick wall, cigarette halfway to his mouth, his eyes going wide as I grabbed his arm. My mouth opened, but nothing came out because if I said one word, Dr. Dynamo would see it on the cameras and push that button. The guard's confused look turned worried as I just stood there gasping and pointing at my phone. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it twice while pulling it from my pocket. I opened the notes app and typed as fast as my fingers would work. Bomb in basement radiology, man with vest. Can't talk is watching. I shoved the screen in his face and watched his expression change from confusion to shock to understanding in about 3 seconds. He reached for his radio, then stopped, his hand freezing in midair as he got it. He nodded once and pointed toward a door marked Security, gesturing for me to follow without making a sound. We moved fast through a narrow hallway that smelled like cigarettes and coffee, my heart still hammering against my ribs. The security office was small and cramped, filled with monitors showing camera feeds from every corner of the hospital. Travis Ortega sat at the main desk reviewing footage, a big guy with gray hair and the kind of calm face that probably never changed no matter what happened. The guard thrust my phone at him, and I watched Travis read the message. For just a second, his professional calm cracked, and I saw real fear flash across his face before he locked it down again. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up different camera angles on the monitors. One screen showed the basement radiology room, and there was Dr. Dynamo pacing back and forth, checking his phone, looking at the door. Travis grabbed his own phone and started typing. He showed me the screen. How many minutes? I took his phone with shaking hands and typed back. Started at 10:18, set for 1030. Maybe 8 minutes left now. Travis's jaw got tight and he started making calls without speaking, just typing rapid messages and sending them to different people. I could see other security personnel on the monitors starting to move through the building, positioning themselves quietly. Travis typed another message and showed it to me. Give us 3 minutes to position people, then go back. Keep him talking. Every part of me wanted to stay right here in this safe room with the monitors and Travis's calm presence. But I thought about my mom upstairs in the cancer ward and Kaylee in the bed next to her, and all those hundreds of people who had no idea they were sitting on top of enough explosives to bring down the whole building. I nodded and headed for the stairs. The walk back down to the basement felt completely different from the sprint out. My legs were like rubber, barely holding me up as I forced myself to take normal steps. The fluorescent lights overhead kept flickering and making this buzzing sound that got inside my head. That chemical smell from the pathology lab was stronger now, burning my nose and making my stomach turn over. I could hear my own breathing echoing off the walls, too fast and too loud. The radiology room door looked exactly the same as when I'd left, but now I knew what was behind it. I grabbed the handle and pushed it open. Dr. Dynamo's head snapped toward me and his thumb moved right over the phone trigger. His eyes were narrow and suspicious as he stared at me. Where's your mother? The question came out sharp and I realized he'd expected me to stay up there longer, to spend those last minutes with her. I swallowed hard and my voice came out shaky when I answered. She was sleeping. I didn't want to wake her for this. The lie felt weak, but I pushed forward. Can I at least send her a text message? Please? He studied my face for what felt like forever, while my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. Then he nodded slowly. Make it brief. Nothing that hints at what's happening here. I pulled out my phone and opened it, but instead of my messages, I went to the Notes app where I'd already typed, Security alerted. Stall him. I angled the screen so he could see I was typing something, but not what it actually said, my fingers moving over the keyboard like I was writing a goodbye. The clock on the wall behind him showed 10:25, and I watched Dr. Dynamo check his own phone screen. The countdown timer glowed green, showing 5 minutes and dropping. The numbers ticked down steady and unstoppable while my mouth went completely dry. My voice cracked when I finally asked the question. Why are you doing this? What did this hospital do that's worth killing 1,000 people? His face twisted and I saw something break through the anger, something raw and hurt. He spent 2 years filing reports about understaffing and broken equipment and corners getting cut to save money, and they buried every single one. The hospital threatened his job when he kept pushing, told him to stop making waves. 3 patients died because the system failed them, and the administration covered it up, paid off families, made everyone sign papers saying they wouldn't talk. His hand shook on that phone trigger, and I watched the tremor move up his arm. I felt this weird flicker in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding that he wasn't just some crazy person with a bomb. The system broke him first. It chewed him up and spit him out, and now he was standing here with enough explosives to level the building. My throat was so dry I could barely get the words out. So his solution was to murder everyone inside to prove the foundation was rotten? That wasn't justice. That was just spreading more death, destroying more families the same way his got destroyed. He actually flinched when I said that, and I knew I'd hit something real under all that rage. The system protects itself, he said quietly, and nothing changes unless you force it to change. Sometimes you have to destroy everything to rebuild it the right way. The countdown on his phone showed 4 minutes now, and sweat was beading up on his forehead, even though the basement was cold. The MRI machine hummed in the next room, and I could hear that ventilation system pushing air through the ducts overhead, normal hospital sounds that felt completely wrong against what was happening. I made this split-second decision to try something desperate because what did I have to lose at this point? What if there was another way? I asked him. What if he could force them to face what they did without killing everyone? He laughed, and it sounded bitter and broken, but I kept talking. He had real leverage right now, actual power. Make them come down here and answer for it before he did this. Make the people who buried his reports look him in the eye. His eyes got narrow and suspicious. I was stalling, he said, and I didn't even try to deny it because he'd see right through a lie. Yeah, I was stalling. But I was also serious. Did he want them to know why this was happening? Then make the administrator who buried every report come down here and acknowledge what they did before he ended it. For about 5 seconds, I thought he was going to press that trigger right there, just detonate and end everything. Instead, he started typing something on his phone with his free hand, his thumb moving over the screen. He was adding 2 minutes to the timer, he said. But if he saw any tricks, any attempts to rush him, he'd end it instantly. The countdown jumped from 4 minutes to 6, and I felt this dizzy wave of relief, even though 6 minutes wasn't exactly safe. Dr. Dynamo picked up the radiology room phone and put it on speaker, his finger stabbing at the buttons. "This is Dr. Dynamo in basement radiology," he said when someone answered. "I need Sienna Barker down here immediately. Tell her if she's not here in 3 minutes, the entire building comes down." He hung up before they could respond, and I heard the operator's voice getting high and panicked as she tried to call back. The phone kept ringing, but he just stared at it. While we waited, I happened to glance through that small window in the door and saw Rick Matthews walking past in the hallway outside. He was the hospital engineer, the guy who knew every pipe and wire in the building. His eyes went wide when he saw the vest strapped to Dr. Dynamo's chest, all those gray blocks and colored wires. Dr. Dynamo didn't notice because he was watching his phone timer count down, and Rick disappeared fast down the hall without making any sound. 2 minutes crawled by in this awful silence where I could hear everything too clearly. The ventilation system humming, a floor buffer running somewhere up above us. Normal hospital sounds that felt surreal when I was standing 10 feet from enough explosives to bring down 8 floors. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Sienna Barker appeared at the door. Her face was pale, but she had this composed look, like she was going into a difficult meeting instead of a room with a bomber. "Come in, Doctor," Dynamo said. "Close the door behind you." Sienna stepped inside, and I watched her register everything in about 2 seconds. The explosive vest, the phone in his hand with the countdown showing, the desperate determination in his eyes that said he was ready to do this. She started to say something about how whatever this was about, they could work it out, but he cut her off hard. She knew exactly what this was about. The safety reports she buried, the patients who died. He pointed at me. "Tell this resident what you did," he said. Sienna's shoulders pulled back and her hands pressed flat against her sides like she was trying to hold herself together. Her lips parted and closed twice before any sound came out. "The committee reviewed every report according to protocol," she said, "and we made changes where it was appropriate to do so." Dr. Dynamo's laugh came out harsh and ragged, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. "You implemented nothing," he said, his voice rising. "You threatened my career when I kept pushing, and you paid off families to stay quiet about what really happened. 3 people died because you chose profit over patient safety, and you know it." I watched Sienna's face and saw something shift in her expression. Not quite an admission, but not denial either. Her jaw tightened and she looked down at her hands for just a second. "The system has constraints," she said carefully, each word measured. "Budget limitations and staffing challenges that you don't understand from your position. We did what we could within those constraints, and that's the truth." The countdown on Dr. Dynamo's phone showed 3 minutes now, and my brain was screaming that we needed to move this conversation towards something that might actually stop him. "What would it take?" I asked, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "What would need to happen right now for you to stop this?" Dr. Dynamo looked at me like I was the most naive person he'd ever seen. "Nothing can undo what's been done," he said quietly. "But maybe if the truth comes out and people know why this happened, something changes for the next hospital. The next person who tries to blow the whistle gets listened to instead of silenced." Sienna saw the opening and jumped on it. "I can call an emergency press conference right now," she said, pulling out her phone. "We can make a statement about the safety issues and launch an independent investigation. Whatever you want, but you have to stop the countdown." Dr. Dynamo shook his head slowly. "Words are cheap and you've made promises before." Through the small window in the door, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, just a flash of dark uniforms positioning themselves quietly down the hallway. Travis must be coordinating an evacuation of the floors directly above us, while we kept Dr. Dynamo talking. The countdown showed 2 minutes and 30 seconds now, and I felt sweat running down my back, soaking through my scrubs. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out slowly, keeping my movements visible. The text was from Donovan. "Cancer ward evacuating," it said. "Your mom asking for you. What's happening?" My chest tightened because I knew they couldn't evacuate everyone in time, even if they started right this second. The pediatric oncology ward alone had kids on ventilators, and patients too fragile to move quickly. "The upper floors," I said urgently to Dr. Dynamo. "At least let them evacuate the patients who can't move on their own. Kids with cancer and people on life support. Give them 15 minutes. His hand tightened on the phone trigger, and I saw his knuckles go white. "Evacuations mean SWAT teams and snipers taking position," he said. "I'm not stupid enough to fall for that." Rick's voice suddenly crackled over the radiology room intercom system, startling all 3 of us. "Dr. Dynamo, this is Rick from engineering," the voice said through the speaker. "I've been shutting down gas lines and closing fire doors in sections around the basement. If you detonate, the blast will be partially contained. You'll still cause massive damage, but you might not bring down the whole tower." Dr. Dynamo's face went red with rage, and he took a step toward the intercom. "That's exactly the kind of half measure that kills people," he shouted at the speaker. "You think containing the blast makes it better? It just means a slower collapse and more suffering. But I could see uncertainty creeping into his eyes because his plan for total destruction was undermined by practical engineering. The countdown showed 90 seconds and Sienna was typing frantically on her phone. I realized she was probably coordinating with security or trying to document everything for legal protection. Dr. Dynamo saw the phone screen glowing in her hands and moved fast, snatching it away from her. "No more games," he said, his voice shaking now. "Everyone stops moving or I end this right now." I raised both hands slowly, palms out, trying to show I wasn't a threat. The question came out before I could stop it. Is the Foundation rotten because of evil people, or because the system is broken and good people got stuck in it? Dr. Dynamo blinked like the question caught him off guard. "What's the difference?" he said flatly. "The outcome is the same either way." My brain was racing because the countdown showed 80 seconds, and I could see his thumb pressed against the phone screen. "The difference is what happens after all this," I said, and my voice came out steadier than it should have considering my hands were shaking. "If you blow up the hospital, you're just one more tragedy they'll bury in the news cycle. But if you force them to actually fix how safety reports get handled, you save the next person who tries to speak up." The countdown hit 60 seconds, and my vision started going dark around the edges like I was looking through a tunnel. Sienna suddenly spoke up beside me, her voice cracking. "I'll resign," she said. "Today. Right now. Publicly. I'll testify about every single report we buried, every corner we cut to save money. I'll give you everything, names and dates and documents, but please don't do this." Dr. Dynamo stared at her, and I saw something shift in his expression, actual doubt creeping into his eyes for the first time. "You'll say anything right now to save yourself," he said, but there was less anger in his voice than before. "The second the timer stops, you'll call your lawyers and bury this whole thing deeper than it was before." Sienna shook her head hard. "I'm already done," she said. "My career ended the moment I walked into this room, but maybe that needs to happen." 50 seconds on the countdown, and I could feel sweat running down my spine, soaking through my scrubs completely. A fire alarm suddenly started blaring somewhere else in the building, the sound piercing and loud even through the thick basement walls. Dr. Dynamo jumped at the noise and his thumb pressed down slightly on the trigger. "That's not us," I shouted over the alarm. "Someone probably pulled it during the evacuation. Please don't do anything." He lifted his thumb back up, but his whole body was shaking now, tremors running through his arms. I took one careful step closer to him, my shoes squeaking on the floor. "I believe you," I said, and the words felt true coming out. "I believe the system failed you completely. I believe people died because of pure negligence. And I believe you think this is the only way to make anyone actually care. But my mom is upstairs right now. She's fighting cancer. She's got maybe 6 months left if the treatment works, and she's spending that time in this hospital trying to live. Please don't take that away from her." Dr. Dynamo's eyes filled up with tears, and they started running down his face. "My daughter was 7 years old," he whispered. "She died in this hospital because they were understaffed and nobody noticed her oxygen levels dropping. 7. They gave us a settlement check and made us sign papers saying we'd never talk about it. Like money could somehow replace her." The countdown showed 30 seconds and his finger was hovering right over the trigger button. "I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it with everything inside me. "That should never have happened to your daughter. You're right that the system is completely broken. But killing my mom won't bring your daughter back. It just creates more families exactly like yours. More fathers who lose everything that matters." 25 seconds left. Rick's voice came over the intercom again, crackling through the speaker. "I've spent the last few minutes rerouting the main support column's stress load to the outer walls," he said. "The basement can absorb the blast without causing full tower collapse. You'll damage the foundation, but the building will stay standing." Dr. Dynamo looked up at the ceiling tiles like he could see straight through 8 floors of concrete to all the patients above us. My mom's room was evacuated right that second, and I pictured Chloe and the other nurses rushing patients down the hallways, trying to move people who could barely walk on their own. Kaylee, the 7-year-old cancer patient who'd become friends with my mom, was probably scared out of her mind from all the alarms and the sudden chaos of people running around. 15 seconds left on the countdown. Sienna's hands were shaking as she pulled a tablet from her bag and held it toward Dr. Dynamo. She said the tablet had copies of every safety report from the last 3 years, including all his reports about violations and ignored warnings. She told him she would give everything to the press right now if he stopped the timer. The countdown showed 10 seconds and I watched his eyes move from her face to the tablet screen and back. 9 seconds. I could see the documentation on the screen, rows of files and dates that proved everything he'd been saying about the hospital's failures. 8 seconds. Sienna was still holding the tablet out with both hands, and I noticed her whole body was trembling, not just her hands. 7 seconds, and I made a choice that might kill all 3 of us. I stepped directly between Dr. Dynamo and the door, close enough that if he pushed the trigger, I would die instantly from the blast. My shoes scraped against the floor as I positioned myself, and his eyes went wide when he realized what I was doing. 6 seconds left. I told him if he was going to detonate, he would have to look me in the eye when he did it. I said he would have to see the face of someone who believed him, and still chose to stand right here. 5 seconds on the countdown, and Dr. Dynamo's voice cracked when he told me to move. His thumb was hovering over the trigger button, and I could see his whole arm shaking from holding it in that position. He said he couldn't let them get away with what they did, couldn't let his daughter's death mean nothing. 4 seconds and I stayed exactly where I was. I told him her death meant he loved her and that wasn't nothing at all. 3 seconds. I said what he was doing now made her death the excuse for more death, that it wasn't justice but just pain spreading to more families. 2 seconds left and his thumb was pressed right against the trigger, his whole arm trembling so hard I thought he might push it by accident. He whispered that he was tired, so tired of fighting a system that didn't care about anything but money. 1 second showed on the countdown, and I stopped breathing completely. Travis's voice suddenly came over the intercom speakers in the ceiling, loud enough to make all of us jump. He said, "Doctor, Dynamo should know they had a mobile command unit outside, and the FBI was there." He told him the FBI wanted to negotiate directly, and they were offering a platform for his story, national news coverage where he could tell everything his way. Travis said he just needed to stop the timer first. Dr. Dynamo's eyes moved to his phone screen, and I saw the countdown had hit 0, but nothing happened. The room was completely silent, except for the hum of the ventilation system and my own breathing that sounded too loud in my ears. I asked in barely a whisper why the bomb hadn't gone off yet. Dr. Dynamo looked down at the phone in his hand, and then up at me, and I watched something break in his face. He said he'd set it to 0, but he had to manually confirm the detonation by pressing the trigger. He told me he thought when the moment came he would be ready to do it. His voice got quieter, and he said he kept seeing his daughter's face and wondering what she would think of him killing all these people. I reached my hand out slowly toward him, moving it through the air between us like I was approaching a scared animal. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady, but I kept reaching. I told him to give me the phone and said we could walk out of here together and tell his daughter's story the right way. I said we could make them answer for what they did without creating more victims like her. My fingers were maybe 6 inches from the phone, and I could see the trigger app still open on the screen, the red button waiting for one press to end everything. 5 seconds passed where nobody moved or breathed or made any sound at all. Then Dr. Dynamo's shoulders dropped and he held the phone out to me. I took it carefully with both hands and looked at the screen showing the trigger button right there under my thumb. I pressed the cancel option, and the countdown app disappeared completely. Sienna let out a sound that was half sob and half gasp of air, and I realized tears were running down my face too. The door burst open hard enough to bang against the wall, and Travis rushed in with 2 other security officers right behind him. They moved toward Dr. Dynamo with their hands out to grab him, but I stepped between them again. I told them to be careful because the vest was still active and we needed the bomb squad. Travis looked at the gray block strapped to Dr. Dynamo's chest and nodded once before speaking into his radio. He said they needed the bomb tech down in basement radiology immediately. Within seconds, I could hear footsteps running down the hallway, and Greg appeared in the doorway carrying a large equipment case. He set the case down carefully and opened it while telling everyone except Dr. Dynamo to move back against the far wall. Greg approached Dr. Dynamo slowly and started talking him through the process of removing the vest. He said to keep everything nice and easy and not touch any of the wires, that he would handle all the clips himself. Greg's hands moved over the vest with careful precision, checking each connection point before touching anything. He explained each step as he worked, identifying which wires went where and which clips held the vest closed. The whole process took 10 minutes that felt like 10 hours while we all stood there watching. Finally, Greg unhooked the last clip and carefully lifted the vest off Dr. Dynamo's torso. He carried it to the containment unit he'd brought and sealed it inside with multiple locks. When the vest was finally secured, Dr. Dynamo's legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees on the floor. He just sat there shaking and staring at his empty hands like he couldn't believe what had almost happened. At 10:37, Greg stood up from the containment unit and turned to face us. He said the device was fully disarmed and there was no more danger. The fire alarms were still going off somewhere above us, that loud mechanical screaming that made my ears hurt. I could hear sirens outside getting louder as more emergency vehicles pulled up to the building. My legs just gave out. I didn't decide to sit down. My body just stopped working, and I dropped hard onto the floor with my back against the cold concrete wall. I couldn't think straight or process that we were actually alive. My hands were still shaking, and I kept looking at the clock, expecting it to suddenly jump back to 10:29 and give us 1 more minute to survive. Travis came over and crouched down next to me, but I couldn't hear what he was saying over the ringing in my ears and the alarms and the sirens. Everything felt far away and underwater. Dr. Dynamo was still on his knees about 10 feet from me, staring at his empty hands like he couldn't believe they weren't holding the phone trigger anymore. 2 police officers came through the door and moved toward him carefully, and he didn't resist when they put handcuffs on his wrists and helped him stand up. His face was blank, totally empty, like something inside him had just shut off completely. They led him out of the room and I watched him go. This man who almost killed us all, who almost killed my mom, and I felt nothing. Just numb, just tired. The next hour turned into a blur of people and noise and questions I couldn't really answer. Paramedics showed up with their big medical bags and started checking everyone over. One of them shined a light in my eyes and asked me questions about my name and what day it was, and if I knew where I was. I answered everything, but my voice sounded weird and flat like it belonged to someone else. They wrapped me in one of those silver shock blankets even though I wasn't cold at all. I was just shaking and I couldn't make it stop no matter how hard I tried. My whole body kept trembling like I was freezing, but I was actually sweating through my scrubs. Police officers came in and out taking statements from everyone who'd been in the radiology wing. I had to tell the story 3 different times to 3 different people, and each time it felt less real, like I was describing something that happened to someone else in a movie I'd watched. Travis sat down on the floor next to me at some point and explained what had happened upstairs during the crisis. He said they'd managed to evacuate about 200 patients from the upper floors once they knew about the bomb. The cancer ward, the pediatric wing, the maternity ward. They'd gotten most of the mobile patients out to other buildings or down to the parking lot. But a lot of people couldn't be moved in time. Patients on ventilators, people in surgery, babies in the NICU. They'd stayed in place with skeleton crews of staff who volunteered to stay with them. I thought about my mom up there, probably one of the ones who couldn't be evacuated fast enough because of her treatments. The idea made my stomach hurt. Donovan found me in the hallway maybe an hour later when they were finally letting people move around more freely. I was still sitting on the floor with that stupid blanket around my shoulders. He came running down the corridor and dropped to his knees in front of me and pulled me into this fierce hug that squeezed all the air out of my lungs. He told me my mom was okay. She was in a temporary room on the 3rd floor where they'd moved some of the cancer patients during the evacuation. Chloe had gotten all the pediatric oncology patients out safely, including Kaylee, that little 7-year-old girl who'd become friends with my mom. Relief hit me so hard I thought I might actually throw up right there on the hallway floor. My throat closed up and my eyes burned, and I had to fight really hard not to just break down crying in front of everyone. Donovan kept talking, telling me what else had happened. 3 people got injured during the evacuation rush. Someone broke their arm falling on the stairs. Another person dislocated their shoulder when they got pushed against a doorframe in the crowd. An elderly patient had a heart attack from the stress of being moved so quickly, but they got him stabilized in time, and he was going to be okay. 3 injuries. That was it. Out of hundreds of people who could have died if that bomb had gone off, only 3 people got hurt, and none of them died. It felt impossible. It felt like we'd somehow cheated something that should have killed us all. I finally made it up to see my mom around noon. The elevators were still shut down for security checks, so I had to climb 8 flights of stairs, and by the time I got to the 3rd floor, my legs felt like rubber. They'd set up temporary patient rooms in what were normally conference rooms and meeting spaces. My mom was sitting up in a bed that had been wheeled into a room with a big table and whiteboards on the walls. She looked tired but alive. Actually alive and breathing and looking at me with her eyes that were the same color as mine. She reached for my hand as soon as she saw me come through the door. She asked what happened because nobody would tell her anything specific. They'd just said there was an emergency, and they needed to evacuate certain floors, and she should stay calm. She asked if I was involved in whatever it was. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice to work right. She pulled me down into a hug and held on tight. She said I was her brave boy, her brave, stupid boy. I could feel her shaking a little bit, and I realized she'd been scared too, not knowing what was happening or if I was safe. We stayed like that for a long time, just holding on to each other in that weird temporary room, while hospital staff rushed around outside dealing with the aftermath. Over the next few days, the full story came out in pieces. News reporters showed up at the hospital trying to interview people. Police held press conferences. Hospital administrators made statements. Sienna Barker resigned on the 3rd day after the incident. She actually did it, just like she'd promised in that radiology room with a bomb vest between us. She turned over all the safety documentation to federal investigators, boxes and boxes of reports and emails, and internal memos showing all the violations that had been ignored for years. The hospital's board of directors faced intense scrutiny from the media and from government agencies. Several executives got forced out in the following week. Dr. Dynamo got charged with attempted terrorism and about 10 other crimes I couldn't keep track of. But his lawyer argued for psychiatric evaluation instead of just throwing him in prison, and his whole history as a whistleblower became part of the public record. News outlets started digging into his daughter's death and the safety violations he'd tried to report. It turned into this big story about institutional failure and what happens when people in power ignore warnings from the people who actually know what's going wrong. I spent hours and hours giving statements to different investigators, police detectives, FBI agents, hospital security, lawyers for the hospital's insurance company. They all wanted to hear the story from my perspective. They recovered security footage from the basement cameras showing the whole incident from start to finish. I had to sit in a conference room and watch myself on those monitors, making the decision to run past the cancer ward toward the loading dock, watching myself sprint down that hallway while the timer counted down. It was horrible seeing it from outside like that, seeing how close I'd come to just going into my mom's room instead. One detective told me what I did was incredibly brave. Then he said it was also incredibly reckless and I could have been killed. I knew he was right about both things, but sitting there watching that footage, I also knew I'd make the same choice again if I had to. I'd run toward that loading dock every single time because it was the only chance to save everyone instead of just spending a few more minutes with my mom before we all died together. The hospital brought in an independent safety review team from outside the state. They spent 2 weeks going through everything with investigators and inspectors. They found exactly what Dr. Dynamo had reported 2 years earlier. Systemic understaffing across multiple departments, equipment failures that had been noted in reports but never actually fixed, a whole culture of prioritizing cost savings over patient safety, of burying problems instead of solving them. The findings made national news. Suddenly there was real pressure for reform, not just at our hospital but at hospitals everywhere. Congressional hearings got scheduled. Regulatory agencies started getting involved. Patient advocacy groups held protests. It became this whole movement about healthcare safety and whistleblower protection. Dr. Dynamo's face was all over the news, and people argued about whether he was a terrorist or a tragic figure, or some combination of both. Nobody could agree on how to think about what he'd done, but the personal cost was heavy for me. I started having nightmares about the countdown. I'd wake up in a panic at 2 or 3 in the morning with my heart racing and sweat soaking through my sheets. In the dreams, I was always back in that radiology room watching the timer tick down, and I couldn't move or speak or do anything to stop it. Paula started staying over most nights because I was scared to be alone when the nightmares hit. She'd hold me when I woke up shaking and talk to me in this quiet voice until my breathing slowed down and I could think straight again. My hands would tremble sometimes during the day when I was reviewing patient charts or doing normal resident work. I'd look at my hands and they'd just be shaking for no reason, and I couldn't make them stop. I found myself checking exits obsessively wherever I went. In the cafeteria, in patient rooms, in the hallways. Always looking for the fastest way out, always planning escape routes in my head. The hospital offered counseling services to everyone who'd been involved in the incident. I started seeing a therapist twice a week. She said I was showing symptoms of acute stress and probably some PTSD from the trauma. She taught me breathing exercises and coping strategies, but mostly I just talked about that day over and over, trying to process what had happened and why I couldn't stop thinking about it. My relationship with Paula changed after the crisis. It got deeper and more serious in a way it hadn't been before. She told me she'd been in the parking lot when everything happened. She'd driven over to visit me on my lunch break and was walking toward the building when all the emergency vehicles started arriving. She watched police and fire trucks and ambulances pull up, and she had no idea what was going on inside. She kept calling my phone and it just rang and rang because I'd left it somewhere during all the chaos. She said she thought she'd lost me. She stood in that parking lot for almost 2 hours, not knowing if I was alive or dead or hurt. When we finally connected later that day, she just broke down crying. Now when we talked about the future, it felt different. More urgent. Like we both understood that time was limited and we shouldn't waste it on being casual or taking things slow. We started talking about moving in together, about what we wanted from life, about building something real instead of just dating and seeing where things went. 3 weeks after the incident, the hospital held a recognition ceremony in the main auditorium. They gave out commendations to everyone who'd helped during the crisis. Me and Travis and Rick and Greg and several others got called up on stage while administrators made speeches about bravery and quick thinking and dedication to patient safety. It felt hollow somehow. They were celebrating us for preventing a disaster that their own negligence had helped create in the first place. All those buried safety reports, all those ignored warnings, they'd set the conditions that drove Dr. Dynamo to do what he did. And now they wanted to give us awards for cleaning up their mess. But my mom was there in a wheelchair in the front row. Her treatments were going better and she'd gotten strong enough to come to the ceremony. When they called my name and I walked across that stage, I looked out and saw her crying and clapping. Her face was so proud and so relieved and so full of love. That made it worth something. Not the commendation or the recognition from the hospital administration, but seeing my mom alive and proud and believing I'd done something good, that mattered. That was enough. Over the next several weeks, Dr. Dynamo's case moved through the court system faster than most because he decided to plead guilty to all charges. The prosecutor wanted to throw the book at him with terrorism charges that could mean life in prison, but his lawyer brought in psychiatrists who testified about his mental state and the trauma from losing his daughter. The judge listened to hours of testimony about the whistleblower reports he filed and how the hospital were ignored every single one. In the end, Dr. Dynamo got 15 years in a federal prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment. His daughter's case got reopened by state investigators, and the hospital settled with his family for what the news said was several $1,000,000, though the exact amount stayed sealed. I watched the sentencing on the news from my apartment and felt this weird mix of relief and sadness. He nearly killed 1,000 people, including my mom, but the system really did fail him first. There were no winners in any of this, just different kinds of losing. Meanwhile, my mom's cancer treatment kept going, and suddenly the hospital started bending over backward to make sure she got the best care possible. New doctors consulted on her case. They adjusted her treatment plan with some newer drugs that cost a fortune. Her oncologist told me they were being extra cautious about everything now, probably terrified of more bad publicity after all the safety violations came out. Mom started responding better to the treatments. Her energy came back a little. She could walk to the bathroom without getting winded. The doctors said they were cautiously optimistic about extending her timeline, maybe giving her another year or two instead of the 6 months they originally predicted. She joked with the nurses that she must be indestructible since she survived both cancer and a terrorist threat in the same building. I laughed along but never told her the real details, never mentioned that I ran past her room or how close the countdown got to 0. 3 months after everything happened, I transferred to a different department away from the basement. I couldn't handle going down there anymore. Every time I walked past the radiology wing, my chest got tight and my hands started shaking. Paula and I got engaged last month. We picked out a ring together and she cried when I proposed in my apartment. Nothing fancy, just the two of us. We're planning a small wedding for next spring, maybe 30 people. My mom will be there if her health holds, and that matters more than anything else. I still think about those 17 minutes sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. I think about running past the cancer ward instead of going in to see my mom. I think about Dr. Dynamo's face when he handed me the phone, how broken he looked. The foundation didn't get torn down like he wanted, but it's being rebuilt more carefully now. The hospital hired new safety officers. They created an anonymous reporting system for staff. Congressional hearings led to new regulations. I carry the weight of that day with me, but I'm learning to live with it. I'm grateful for the lives we saved, haunted by how close we came to losing everything, and determined to be the kind of doctor who never lets safety concerns get buried again. That's my perspective on what happened, but I know some of you are already forming your own takes. Share them in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how differently everyone reads the same story. I will be checking through them later.